currencies, and these are liberal democracies where people have reasonable guarantees over property rights. Everybody else either lives under like a weaker currency or an authoritarian regime. That's 87% of the world's population, almost 7 billion people. So for them, a sovereign savings account that's permissionless, meaning you don't have to have ID to use it, is a big, big deal. And a lot of people talk about Zimbabwe or Venezuela as like isolated cases. Oh, well, you know, hyperinflation only happens in those two countries. I actually did some research about this, and there's about close to 1.3 billion people who live under double or triple digit inflation. This is not an isolated instance. We're talking huge countries. Nigeria, 200 million people, 15% inflation. Turkey, 15% inflation for 100 million people. Argentina, 40% inflation for a country of 45 million people. So you can go down the list, there's about 35 countries where like people's earnings, their wage, are literally disappearing over there against things like that. So it absolutely is a human rights issue for me. I mean, when it comes to your time and energy, having control over that or having it stolen from you, it's pretty clear. Bitcoin is like an immediate, low cost, easily accessible solution for people. And I've learned this not from my own assumptions, but I interviewed dozens of people, whether it's in Sudan, which currently has triple-digit inflation, or people who escaped from Syria, who have used Bitcoin to get their wealth out of the country and then also to make payments back to people inside, or Venezuela, or else. It's very, very powerful.
I think some very small percentage of people have owned Bitcoin.
About a little under 200.
Yeah.
At most, right now.
If you look at Zimbabwe,
Small percentages.
fuck. Come on, I think the technology is mature enough. We've mentioned about the idea also about the implementation of it. Like, you know, Bitcoin, for the most part, requires access to the internet. Yeah. And what do you think about accessibility of this technology now as a method of activism in the middle part of the world? We often think that all the conversations we have on Bitcoin is essentially middle class, like wealthy people relative to the rest of the world. So they're kind of talking in sort of investment and high concept ideas. And then there's also people in the world who are suffering or live with hyperinflation. They may not have computer access to the internet. Like, how do you think Bitcoin can help them?
Yeah, so I mean, we have one clear use case, which is a sovereign savings account, right? The other use case is an unstoppable payments network. This is very important for people who live behind, for example, sanctions. Like the U.S. like basically recognizes the dollar and like sanctions different countries. And instead of sanctioning like a handful of rulers, for example, which I would support, like it's smart sanctions. Sometimes we'll just say, we're just going to shut off this whole country. New York, Cuba, or Iran are good examples. Average people suffer, right? So people in those two countries that you mentioned, Cuba, Iran, or even Palestine, which is also sort of like blockaded by the Israelis. So you have Cuba, Iran, Palestine, three good examples where people inside all three of those countries now are using Bitcoin to do commerce, do their business, send money back and forth. So this is sanctions resistant. It does not get stopped by sanctions, right? And also, again, remittances are extortionate. I mean, the average remittance, costs has a high fee. It takes several days. If your family is in Ghana or something like that, or Nigeria, you live in the United States, it can take time to use Western Union. Sometimes, it gets paused, it gets lost, there's issues, you have to go to customer service. Screw that. I mean, the person has a cell phone, which increasingly is the case. I mean, by the end of next year, more than 5 or 6 billion people, depending on different estimates, will have smartphones, basically, by the end of 2022. We're talking like the vast majority of humans will have access to smartphones. They can all have sovereign Bitcoin wallets. And there's even ways to access Bitcoin without the internet. But I mean,
there's like hardware wallet and so on. What do you mean by sovereign Bitcoin wallet?
Most users today are using Bitcoin in a custodial manner. So this is kind of like having a bank account where you have a deposit account at a bank, right? So you have a claim, right? You go to the bank, they have some right? You with an ATM. So what I would call non-custodial Bitcoin use would be similar to withdrawing cash from the ATM. You have it. It's a bearer instrument, okay? So it's what's called bearer instrument.
I know.
So,
I apologize. I'm outside this community. Just sounds funny.
No. Yeah. So like a bearer instrument would be like bar gold or
Yes.
a banknote or Bitcoin that you control. Meaning you have the secrets, right? Which for the listeners essentially is 12 to 24 English words that you write down on a piece of paper. That's your like password to get into your Bitcoin account, and that gives you that bearer. Right? But unfortunately, most users still use Bitcoin. They buy it on Coinbase, where and look, the good news is you can withdraw your and in the Bitcoin community we try to teach this idea that it's not your keys, not your coin. In the same way that if you deposit your money in the bank, you might not get it back. I mean, it's low likelihood, but it's very possible. That same thing in Bitcoin. Like, if you want to get the full experience, you want to actually custody your own Bitcoin. You want to put it, whether it's on an open source software wallet, like a Blue wallet, is a good one for people to check out, or a hardware wallet like Cold Card, for example. There's different ways to do this. But essentially, like, around the world, people are innovative. Like, don't think so low of your fellow man, you know what I mean? Like, people are figuring this out. You know, I get a lot of flack from people saying, oh, Bitcoin's so hard to use. I read this article in the New York Times saying this guy in Silicon Valley lost all of his Bitcoin. It's because he was a moron and didn't care about it. This guy lost all this Bitcoin because it wasn't worth much 10 years ago. And, you know, he forgot the password. If you're, like, receiving your remittance from a family member, you're not going to lose the password, right?
And you trust in the basic intelligence of people to figure this out and to innovate and so on and figure out.
We're watching.
Yeah, you know, and it's kind of funny, but people in the United States are not very savvy with money. It's exactly the way you're describing. It's like when you have very little money, you're going to be savvy with money. You're going to understand exactly the mechanisms that work, that are resistant to the corruption that's around you. I mean, I remember sort of growing up in the Soviet Union, the general bureaucracy and the corruption of everything around you, you figure out ways around that. You figure out ways how to function within that kind of system to survive under inflation, under hyperinflation, under all, like, basically being unable to trust any kind of, even the police force and all those kinds of things. You figure it out. And in that same way, perhaps Bitcoin could be all the different ways to store and gain Bitcoin. These mechanisms could be something that's figured out in the third world as opposed to in the
I mean that's the capital of Bitcoin could easily be Lagos and not San Francisco.
Yes.
In terms of users, in terms of people using it. And again, the two use cases, as a savings account and as an unstoppable payment rail. These are the two ones that you should really think about. This is how people are using it today. Now, when it comes to could it possibly be adopted by like a sufficient majority of the population, I say yes. And it's very similar to the way the mobile phone spread. At the beginning, the cell phone was only for rich people. It was only for the elite. It was huge. It didn't work very well. The interface sucked. It was clunky. Over time, it got smaller and smaller and cheaper and easier to use and easier to use. And today, everyone benefits. So you're going to watch a similar technology upgrade process. Already in the last 10 years, Bitcoin's gotten so much easier to use. I mean, there are now mobile wallets that are so slick. There's one called Moon, M-U-N wallet from Team Argentina. And these guys created it because they saw their own currency devalued like 3 times in the last 20 years. And they've had a hell of a time trying to get their money back and forth in different countries. So they were like, let's make this easy. Again, you know, this is the people's money. This is something they can control by government corporations. That makes it very powerful. I think it's actually quite exciting to be here in the adoption phase. Like, yeah, this is the early days.
And you also mentioned that Bitcoin is the mechanism of a peaceful revolution. So it's a way to resist authoritarianism in a peaceful way. So ultimately, I mean, you know, you mentioned sort of politics, information, and money. It seems like in the space of money, this is one of the peaceful mechanisms.
So wait, opt out. You can opt out from the system. And
it's beautiful. It's beautiful. So Bitcoin is currently by far the most popular as a dominant cryptocurrency. That said, and I look forward to your letters if you come back to this. That said, Internet Explorer was the most popular browser for quite a long time, and then other browsers came along that outcompeted it, like Chrome, Firefox, English General Brave, the great browser. I think it's my favorite browser at this point. Anyway, so why Bitcoin? Why not another cryptocurrency? If you look in the next 10, 20, 50, 100 years, do you think it's possible for another cryptocurrency like Ethereum, something that has not even here yet, to overtake Bitcoin as a mechanism?
When you say overtake, what do you mean? You mean overtake? You mean number of users? You mean a price per coin?
The number of users. So we're talking about 1%. And if we are serious about this being in the space of money as a way to give individuals power, fight the centralized powers that abuse the money system and so on, how do we get from 2% to 50%, right, to 60% to 80%? That jump isn't as obvious to you, not obvious, but do you think Bitcoin is the way to get from 2% to 50%, or are there going to be other cryptocurrencies that may emerge that get 50%?
No, I mean, Bitcoin is the innovation. Innovation is in having the decentralized things. No one can change the monetary laws. Everything else is downstream from there. In Bitcoin, the mean would be 21 million. There's never going to be any more than 20 million. Every other cryptocurrency either has an inflationary policy, meaning there's going to continue more and more of it over time, or its monetary policy will change by some people. This is vividly on display in Ethereum, which is like the second largest robust cryptocurrency, right? I've talked to senior Ethereum engineers over the last couple of weeks trying to figure out what is the monetary policy of Ethereum. No one can tell me. No one knows how much ETH is going to be minted in 2022 and 2023 after they shift to proof of stake. I've seen estimates that range from 100,000 to 2 million. So at the end of the day, you're going to be trusting a small group of people to make those decisions. That is what we are escaping with Bitcoin. So all these other cryptocurrencies, they might have their use cases. Virtually all of them are not. It's very important for people to know that if you take like the 4,500 cryptocurrencies on CoinMarketCap, almost all of them are scams, straight up. Even the ones that have like noble intentions, I just don't think are going to add that much value. Ultimately, I think Bitcoin to me is the innovation, and that's because it has a monetary policy and an issuance schedule that cannot be changed, and that's what gets me so excited about it.
Yeah, it's interesting because when you grow from 2%, when you grow in the number of people using it, the scale they're using it, it's going to need to be resistant to the government messing with it. So it's interesting to see what kind of cryptocurrency will be resistant to that. Obviously, Dogecoin is going to be.
Well, I mean, the number 2 cryptocurrency in the world, probably by like how Tether, which is totally centralized, has black risks. So I'm not saying there won't be like new digital assets that are lumped into this category that have usage, but they're not. It's not the same innovation as Bitcoin. It's just sort of building on this idea of like $0 maybe, like a dollar that is minted outside of the control of the U.S. Federal Reserve, right? It would be a $. So stablecoins are kind of like $0 just minted by private actors, in a way, right? But they're still tied to the dollar. They're pegged to the dollar. They're not escaping the system. Escaping the system is Bitcoin. We aren't reliant on the dollar. We have our own, full store value we exchange unit account eventually. And, the Bitcoin world will be denominated in different terms. And I think everything else will be tied to it. I really do.
It does feel currently like Bitcoin is like pirates or something like that, and they're still like the central banks that are like the main navies of the different nations.
Yeah.
It's just this, if you talk about scale. So there's going to be a moment if Bitcoin continues to grow in its impact, when governments are going to seriously contend with, what do we do with this? Do you think about those moments? Is Bitcoin, is the cryptocurrency world in general going to be able to withstand the serious legal pushback from countries, from nations? especially authoritarian nations.
Yeah, so it's been interesting. It's been 12 years, okay? More than 12 years since Satoshi Nakamoto created Bitcoin. And they haven't been able to stop it. They've tried. They've tried a lot. I wrote a long essay for Quillette on this. Like, why haven't governments been able to stop Bitcoin? And my thesis is essentially that there's been like this mix of different kind of technical, social, and economic and political incentives and disincentives that make it very difficult. And I think to me the best way to think about it is that Bitcoin's like a Trojan horse. So just to actually tell that story just a little bit, because I think it's important to understand the classical mythology tale. I find it's very interesting.
Of the actual
Trojan horse, yeah, it was told in the Aeneid actually by Virgil, right? And the idea was the Greeks had been like trying to take the city of Troy for like a decade. It's an impregnable wall. Couldn't do it. And Ulysses and the rest of the Greek army were like, so Minerva, the god of strategy and war, you know, kind of like they get this idea from her, I guess, to actually try to use subterfuge and trickery to take over the city. So the idea is, and this was sort of hatched by Ulysses, right, to put this horse together that would kind of be like a gift. So the idea was the Greeks just like pretended to leave, right? They deserted. They left behind one soldier and this horse. The Trojans looked at it and they were like, what's going on here? And they brought in the soldier, and the soldier's like, look, they left, they're so sorry for all of the desecration and blood spill. This is their gift to you, it's, you know, honoring Minerva, it's like this, like, you know, trophy for you guys. And there were actually people inside the world, Cassandra, a prophet, as well as Laocoon, the priest, said, no, this is obviously a trick. This is obviously a trick. They were like, ignored because the horse was like, so bad. So the Trojans were like, bring it into the city. So they brought it to themselves. No blood spilled at all, right? In the middle of the night, of course, what you realize is that they're attacked by soldiers, and they come out and they let the army in. It's like, so this idea that like something could be so attractive that you really can't say no, even if you know what's inside of it, is at play in Bitcoin. So like, in Bitcoin has this number go up technology, right? It is what we call it, sort of short NGO. What people don't realize is that NGO is like the Trojan horse. Inside the Trojan horse is FGO, freedom go up technology. So dictators and rogue regimes and corporations are going to buy, mine, tax, accumulate this thing because it's the best way to financialize that in the world. What they don't realize, or they're going to have to ignore, is that they're also aiding and abetting this freedom technology, which allows individuals to be sovereign and eventually erodes their power. There's no question that rogue regimes are bad actors. I've already used and will continue to use Bitcoin. The thing is, when you think about North Korea or Venezuela, and that government instructs some of its bureaucrats and cronies and officials to start stealing Bitcoin or accumulating it or whatever for short-term gain to get around sanctions and use it to buy dollars or something like that, right? Which they can't get normally. Well, guess what? All those people who the regime has instructed to like figure this thing out and use it, they're all going to realize, oh my God, this is money the government doesn't control, and it's going to spread like a virus. Okay, so this is like the idea of the Trojan horse allegory. Why I think it's so important and powerful with Bitcoin. All the people talking about Bitcoin today on TV, they don't care about freedom and privacy. They just care about number go up. But what they don't realize is what's concealed within, and that's very, very powerful.
The people talking about Bitcoin on TV on the TV investment.
Yeah, professional investors, corporations, and governments. You just had today this morning on CNBC, the Republican leader of the House of Representatives, Congress, said he's like, we need to grow Bitcoin, right? And the other day, he had a very interesting comment where he was basically like, let's not fall behind China in this race. So you have influential people in our government like sort of posturing for this like Bitcoin race that's going to happen in the next 10 years. You can see this. Countries are going to compete to stack Bitcoin. Absolutely.
So you believe the thing that's shiny and sexy with the Trojan horse, the number go up?
It's too hard to ignore.
And to define that a little further, it does seem like the more people get excited as they use Bitcoin, the more value grows. So it's just a good
Feedback.
yeah, feedback loop. And then the reason you're excited about it especially is that
Freedom go up.
freedom go up, which is it ultimately gives power to the individuals to just so decentralized.
Yeah, I mean, like when Tesla stacks Bitcoin, they're just doing that as self-interest. They think it's going to be a good inflation hedge. Fine. But what they don't care about, don't realize, or they don't need to care. I mean, Bitcoin's power is it like co-opts people into promoting a freedom tool, even if they don't care about it, or even if they hate freedom. It doesn't matter. So when Tesla stacks Bitcoin and the price goes up, and more interest goes up, and more people around the world are like, wow, Bitcoin, then more people get involved. Again, more adoption, more price, more developers, better user interface, more privacy tools, more mining, more network security. It's just this like positive feedback loop that continues to grow, and it will grow intensely in the next decade as we go through the adoption cycle. And the reason why I'm so excited about this is the human rights world, again, to get back to our previous conversation, it's very hard to find people who have, the empathy or the altruism to actually make a difference abroad in places like China, Saudi Arabia, or North Korea. People are very quick to just like